Hello everyone, it's Mariners Fanatic here, and today I will be re-evaluating the infamous ERIK Bedard trade that saw us trade away George Sherrill, Chris Tillman, Tony Butler, Kia McColio, and Adam Jones for the previously mentioned ERIK Bedard. It's almost the 13-year anniversary of this trade, and it still continues to live in infamy among Mariners fans everywhere, and baseball fans everywhere, frankly, because of how poorly the trade went. So in this video, I'm going to be going over why it made sense at the time, what went wrong, and kind of the end results and overall evaluation of the trade. I will also be discussing the main piece in this trade that has come to haunt us, which is Adam Jones, and basically looking at the Mariners center field over the period of time that Adam Jones was with the Orioles and compare who played center field for the Mariners versus Adam Jones and his 10-year career in Baltimore, and just kind of compare and look at what we were missing out on. Why did this trade happen? Well, after the 2007 season, the Mariners had finished 88 and 74 and had missed out on the playoffs by a few games to the Yankees. There wasn't that extra wild card for the Mariners to get. If that were the case, they probably would have made the playoffs that year. But unfortunately, they didn't. And at this time, they took a look at their team and were like, okay, we're a few pieces away. What do we need to add to get us over that hump and get us into the playoffs? On the flip side, the Orioles finished fourth and were 69 and 93 in 2007. They had ERIK Bedard, who pitched great for them in '07, but realistically was not going to help them in a rebuilding effort of sorts. They needed to be getting younger and finding better pieces, and having ERIK Bedard on the squad didn't make sense, and it made more sense to trade him. In February of 2008, that's what they did. They got quite a prospect package from the Mariners that, frankly, I wouldn't make this move if I were the Mariners. ERIK Bedard was good, but to me, this trade package was worthy of someone like Chris Sale or some other top tier pitcher. He was a great pitcher in 2006 and 2007, but he wasn't elite by any means. And so to give up this many five players for one player, definitely risky and not a fan of the move in general. For example, if it was Blake Snell this offseason, you could argue, okay, Blake Snell has a really solid track record and he's still young. ERIK Bedard was 28 at the time of this trade, so not old by any means. But if you look at his career track record, he hadn't pitched 200 innings in a single season at all. In 2004, he pitched 137 innings, 2005, 141, 2006, 196, and then 2007, 182. And for a top tier starting pitcher, those innings numbers are not enough, in my opinion, to warrant such a package of prospects and players in return. However, the idea that this trade shouldn't have happened at all in the first place, there's not really any merit for that because of where the teams were at and what the Mariners front office thought. The trade did, in a sense, make sense. Looking back, obviously, it's terrible. But at the time, you can make arguments for why this trade would have made sense, even though I still probably would not have done it. So, what went wrong with this trade? Well, at the time of the trade, Adam Jones was a young center field prospect with the Mariners, and he had only played 73 games with the big club, and he had batted .230 in 147 plate appearances. I'm not going to go into all of the sabermetrics or anything deep into it, just to say that he was a good prospect, but he hadn't done much yet, and maybe they were expecting more out of him. At this time in 2007, watching him play, I was only 9 years old, so I don't remember too much, but I do remember being excited about him. And even though he was struggling, there was still like some upside to that, and you were excited about him. And 230 for a young player, it's not to be unexpected in their first season or so. Not everybody can come up and light it up like Kyle Lewis did in his first September call up and hit 8 home runs in 10 games or whatever it was. You want to give these prospects a chance. It kind of felt like they didn't give Adam Jones a chance in Seattle, which I'll get into later there was not really another option in center field. Obviously, I'll get into it in a bit, but we know what Adam Jones became. He wasn't a 230 hitter by any means. But what went wrong on the Erik Bedard side? Now, a lot of people forget about this, is that Erik Bedard actually pitched pretty well for the Mariners. The problem with Erik Bedard was injuries. And I mentioned it already, but coming up to that point, he had not thrown very many innings. Though he didn't have much of an injury past at that time, he was not an innings eater. He was not a guy who could get you 200 innings a season. Well, for the Mariners in 3 years, he pitched 255 innings. That's it. Now, he was good in those 255 innings. He was 15 and 14 with a 3.31 ERA, 3.85 FIP, and a 123 ERA plus, which is actually really good. But, like I mentioned, 255 innings over 3 years is not worth what we gave up. And no matter how good he was, if you're only throwing that many innings in 3 seasons, you're not a big X factor on the team. And ultimately, he ended up being flipped to the Red Sox for Trayvon Robinson in 2011, who had very minimal impact, did not do very much with the squad, and was traded to the Dodgers a year and a half later. That's mainly what went wrong with the trade, is that Erik Bedard, though he pitched well in Seattle, was very injury prone and did not live up to the potential he had as being a number one or number two starter and giving you 200 innings. What went wrong on the other side is Adam Jones turned into a perennial all-star, playing for the Orioles for 10 years and having great seasons. So going back to the trade package itself and focusing a little bit on that. Obviously, I already told you Erik Bedard's stats and what we got. But what else did we give up in this trade? George Sherrill pitched 2 years in Baltimore and was 3-6 with 51 saves, a 3.71 ERA in 94 innings out of the pen, with an ERA plus of 122 and a FIP of 3.86. Now, relievers, those come and go. It's not necessarily a surprise that he did well or didn't do well. He's not the main factor in this trade. But George Sherrill was a good pitcher with the Mariners, and he was a decent reliever for the Orioles as well. And George Sherrill helped them out over the next couple seasons. We lost a reliever, but that's not a huge deal. Next up is Chris Tillman. Now, Chris Tillman pitched 10 years for the Orioles, 74 and 60 with a 4.57 ERA in 1,145 innings pitched. He had a FIP of 4.72, an ERA plus of 91. Honestly, a lot of people are like, oh, Chris Tillman, Chris Tillman. Yeah, we gave up a guy who, in retrospect to Erik Bedard, who was not an innings eater. Tillman threw over 1,000 innings, which is really good if you're looking to get innings. Although his ERA is pretty average and his FIP is not as exciting. He really only had 4 good seasons. 2012 to 2014 were his best seasons. That did correspond with when the Orioles had some playoff runs. So that did work out for them. And then he had one more good season in 2016. But if we're looking at that ERA plus, that 91 ERA plus in comparison to Erik Bedard had an ERA plus of 123, which is pretty solid. Chris Tillman was not really a loss. Yes, he would have given us innings, developed into a nice 4-5 starter. But similar to George Sherrill, we really didn't lose too much there. Moving on, Tony Butler washed out, never made it to the bigs. Obviously, Mariners didn't lose anything in that. Ben Colio was the next piece in this trade, and he really didn't do much either. Over 4 seasons in the big leagues with Baltimore and Arizona, he was 0-3 with a 4.83 ERA, and I'm not going to speak too much on him just because he didn't really do much, didn't make a huge impact in this trade. So moving on to what you guys can already expect to be the main point of the video is Adam Jones. This is the big piece in the trade, the big loss. In 11 years with Baltimore, I'm not going to focus on his time in Arizona, or now he's playing in Japan, as far as I know. I don't expect him to come back to the States, but, could still happen. But in 11 years with the Orioles, he was a 5-time All-Star, 4-time Gold Glove, 1 Silver Slugger, played 1,600 games, had almost 1,800 hits. 2012 to 2015 was kind of his prime years, and that was around the time that the Orioles were making their playoff runs. Similar to Chris Tillman, he got good around the time that the Orioles were getting into their stride. Overall, as an Oriole, Adam Jones batted .277, 263 home runs, 866 RBIs, and had an OPS plus of 109, which is better than the league average hitter. 109 OPS plus is pretty solid. Obviously, in his prime, his OPS plus was a lot better than that. A couple of his earlier seasons and a couple of his later seasons brings his OPS plus down a bit. But overall, he was an all-star, a solid player year after year with the Orioles. And that's the major loss in this trade. 11 years out of Adam Jones versus 3 years of injury-prone ERIK Bedard. That's really what we gave up. Now, you can talk about George Sherrill or Chris Tillman, but Adam Jones is the big loss in this trade. And here's the main reason why. Going back, the Mariners center fielders since the trade happened in 2008. So going back, I looked at the center fielder for the Mariners that got the primary innings and playing time per season. Just to preface, it's not great. In 2008, Jeremy Reed played 97 games and batted .269. At the time, we had Raul Ibanez in left field and Ichiro in right field. Solid options, nothing to worry about in the corner outfields. But center field was still kind of a hole at the time. Adam Jones very well could have developed and become our starting center fielder, as Jeremy Reed was really not the long-term option there. However, the next offseason, crazy trade with the Indians, Jack Zduriencik managed to get Franklin Gutierrez. In 2009, Franklin Gutierrez had a great season. He batted .283 with 18 home runs and 70 RBIs in 153 games. Great season. Gutierrez was a pretty decent defender. Maybe not a Gold Glover, but he was pretty good. Which is like, okay, that's pretty good. At this point, you're kind of like, okay, this trade hasn't been too bad so far. And in 2010, Gutierrez was again the starting center fielder. He played 152 games and batted .245. Regressed a little bit on the hitting side, was still decent in center field, but overall, decent center fielder for what you have. Moving on to 2011, Gutierrez starts to have injury problems. He only plays in 92 games and has a .224 batting average. In these lists, I'm listing the person who got the primary starts in center field, and even with his injuries, Gutierrez was still the player who led at that position for the Mariners in 2011. Moving to 2012, Michael Saunders steps onto the scene. He plays 139 games in center, bats .247 with 19 home runs and 57 RBIs. He played decently well, and Saunders was another prospect guy coming up through the system that the Mariners were high on, and he did decent. Played decently well. At that time, though, Ichiro was traded. Ibanez is not around anymore, and the outfield is just kind of in shambles. And realistically, Michael Saunders is probably more of a corner outfield guy. He played well in center, but not groundbreaking. Moving to 2013, Saunders again had the bulk of the innings there. 132 games, .236 batting average. Pretty average hitter, decent defender, but he filled in plenty of games. 2014, James Jones batted .250 in 108 games, had no pop, was a good defender, but very light hitting. That same year, we ended up trading for Austin Jackson, who played in 54 games and batted like .230, something like that. Moving to 2015, Austin Jackson became the starting center fielder, played in 107 games, and batted .272. Had a decent year. Next up, in 2016, we had Leonis Martine, who in 143 games batted .247, and he played pretty well defensively and had a decent offensive season. He wasn't really the guy. They thought he might mold into something, but you could tell hitting-wise he was never going to be amazing. Next up, in 2017, we had Gerard Dyson, who played 111 games, batted .251. Guillermo Heredia also played in center field quite a bit, and he played in the outfield 123 games and batted .249. And then in 2018, Guillermo Heredia played in 125 games and batted .236. All of these center fielders were fairly decent defenders. Dyson and Heredia were both really fast guys. Martine was pretty solid. Austin Jackson at this point was aging, did okay, but wasn't groundbreaking by any means. James Jones, fast, light contact hitting guy. Michael Saunders had potential but never really grew into it. And then Franklin Gutierrez was pretty solid for us, but just struggled with injuries on and off and was never the premier guy at that position. And then Jeremy Reed really did nothing while he was with the Mariners in center field. All this to say is that it has been a revolving door in center field for the Seattle Mariners. I didn't talk too much about 2019 because that's when Adam Jones left the Orioles and Kyle Lewis came up in September and kind of claimed that role. And Kyle Lewis is kind of potentially the future at this point. So all this to say, you already knew that this trade was bad. It's been an infamous trade for years, but it wasn't as bad at the beginning. It really got worse as Chris Tillman had 10 seasons with the Orioles, and Adam Jones was a all-star pretty much year after year and was a really solid center fielder. Meanwhile, the Mariners, it was a revolving door in center field for 10 years. They could never figure it out. This was a bad trade. It cost the Mariners having an everyday center fielder for 10 years, essentially. If you think about it in this term, Adam Jones in center field from 2008 to 2018, Kyle Lewis still comes up and replaces him in 2019. Yeah, hindsight's 2020. Maybe it wouldn't have worked out all that perfectly, but that's the thing, you never know. And it would have been kind of cool to see Adam Jones in a Mariners uniform for his whole career. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So to end this re-evaluation, the Mariners clearly lost this trade and has been a thorn in our side for years. This is a new era of Mariners baseball, and I think now that Kyle Lewis and more young studs are coming up, we can move past this trade and go into a new era of Mariners baseball where we can kind of slowly forget about the Jack Sorensic and Bill Bavasi era. That's the main reason why I'm making this video, is to kind of close the book on an era of front office management that was pretty poor and move into the future that is having Kyle Lewis, Jared Kelenic, Julio Rodriguez, and others roaming that outfield and hopefully turning into a perennial playoff team in the next couple years. Maybe not in 2021, but hopefully in 2022 and 2023, the Mariners can really make that push. It's time to put the ERIK Bedard trade to rest with this video. With that said, thanks for watching. This one was a long one. If you stuck through the whole thing, thank you guys a lot. Mariners Fanatic, out.